Ladies and gentlemen, it is truly great pleasure and honor to be here with you today to share and be part of discussions during this conference. As my speech is prepared in English, I will give the floor to my translator to read it to you, because my English is very limited.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to be part of this annual conference on cultural diplomacy. Let me thank the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy, along with the director, Mr. Mark Donfried, for their warm welcome and hospitality. I'm not going to start my speech before such a distinguished audience about the rule of law, which principles, summed up by the concept, are not only accepted, but revered, even worshipped everywhere in our time. The freedom under the rule of law is repeatedly proclaimed as the core definition of Western democracies by all the leaders of the democratic world. However, I am more interested to speak about significance of culture, and by extension, cultural diplomacy, how we perform it, how is the culture of humanity presented in practice, and how we regulate and represent our relations. As representative of a young state, which is still challenged by the post-war consequences, the significance of culture is not lost on us. After all, we represent the distinctive cultural diversity, which more than ever, must do all we can to maximize the opportunities that will enable to cultivate our relations and relationships amongst ourselves and the rest of human world. Today, the world cultures have become too interconnected and interdependent, socially, economically, and politically, to ignore. The digital age has forced us into ever closer intimacy. Our modes of communication are no longer constrained by geography or cultural divisions. More and more people converse, operate, trade, invest, interact, and take decisive and groundbreaking action, with social media as their central tool. The question is not whether we should participate in public diplomacy, of which cultural diplomacy is a major part, but how we can harness cultural diplomacy as a force for good. Certainly, without freedom, nothing of this would have had a meaning. Freedom is the biggest gain as of the second half of the 20th century. Modern society are trying to develop concepts that allow them to protect their citizens and at the same time stay competitive in the globalized markets. The approach of new welfare state is no longer to arrange for full coverage of all risks, but to replace the existing enormous expensive systems with more targeted and efficient approaches. In fact, the whole world is passing through a transition or transformation. Our present world faces a series of paradoxes. Underdevelopment does not exclude arming, democracy does not eradicate corruption, and market economy fails to prevent ecological disaster and unemployment. Almost 70 years after it was adopted, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is systematically defied, either on ideological pretexts or under the endemic burden of poverty. Organized crime, terrorism, drugs, and weapons trafficking, radioactive substances, prostitution, pedophilia, black market economy, and forced immigration are the most striking, but not the only aspects of worldwide threats that governments, law enforcement agencies, or humanitarian organizations have to battle against, often admitting their inefficiency. The prospect for peace and development must be considered against the background of this transition or transformation. In this classic peace and development question have become everyone's concern. Therefore, the crucial demand for policy makers is in the development world should be familiar, identifying strategies for participation in the global economy, mobilizing resources for competitive advantage in a global world, managing the internal and external imbalances in order to avoid being undermined by social instability or vicious cycle of economic dualism. For that reason, to achieve all these things, we need a better understanding of the globalized world and human relations. These globalized citizens, especially young people, do not assume long-term identities and loyalties, but only pragmatic and present ones. They are very active and mobile and settle according to each person's character in areas, offering them a minimum of risk or, on the contrary, a maximum of opportunity. This kind of population is expected to grow during the next years as we see it frequently on the present time. It is only possible to say that peace and development go hand in hand if development is something you can do at home so long as the world is stable and you are left alone. But this is not how it is. Development is something you and everyone else do in dynamic relationship with others. And in order to do great things, we have to humanize our relationships. As a result, we can build mutual understanding. We can even wrap benefits for our own citizens. They learn to embrace and share valuable information with other cultures. They develop relationship in personal or virtually. They develop international contacts that can enhance careers. They benefit economically from the trade and investment that can flow. We understand that cultural diplomacy has become a powerful instrument to connect a variety of expressions within the universal frame of legacy and legitimacy. But we must also recognize that in Kosovo's case, being a younger state, we cannot do it alone. We need partners, we need support, and we need access to networks and partnerships with others to advance our goals. That means working with multilateral institutions, states, arts, organizations, foundations, universities, artists, and others. Kosovo has much to receive, but also much to offer to the world. Cultural diplomacy can be a force multiplier that enhances relationship, builds understanding, advances prosperity, and strengthens our own national security. It starts with acknowledging that culture is more than its paintings, relics, mosques, churches, or cuisine. It is about the human aspiration they represent. When we bridge cultures, we don't just ensure what people treasure. We build richer, more diverse, and mutual trusting partnership for the future. And that makes cultural diplomacy an essential tool of our era. And the last but not the least, I admit, bad habits die hard. I started with the rule of law and will end with it. I will say that in spite of past legacy, its drama and pain, Kosovo struggles to fully implement the rule of law as one of the basic principles. But, in my view, any society which aspires to institute or reinstate the rule of law must know that this is far from being an automatic process, a sudden and painless epiphany of the law. It is a long and hard struggle. But with the past and with the present, it is a hard struggle to create institutions, and the harder one to make them function and work properly. It is a constant struggle, not only for the politicians or judiciary, but for the society as a whole. It is a struggle not for a day or a year, but for a lifetime. A struggle which needs courage and support of everybody. I believe that by cultivating our relations and relationships within the common frame of universal values, we will enable everyone to resonate the rule of law, gathered and connected as proud ambassadors of cultural diplomacy, our diversity and human rights practices. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for an excellent speech. I totally agree that by building bridges between cultures, we make all our lives richer. Now, are there any questions you would like to put to Fejzullah Hasani? If there are no questions, we join in applauding him and thanking him for his speech.